Namaste. So there are certain realizations that are like gateways or passwords that open up the path or the window, or maybe you want to call it a gateway to higher realizations. So that means as you get one realization, it paves the path to even higher realizations. On this channel, we started from the premise that I would not talk about anything that I haven't experienced. In other words, no empty theorizing or philosophizing, but simply descriptions of my own experience of spiritual practice. And so we began from the idea of being in the world, the existential human condition, the source of the problems that spiritual life addresses. And then we moved on from there to a deep analysis of Buddha's teaching. Buddha's teaching is very nice because it's based on experience. And the Buddha is apophatic. We have a whole series on apophatic or apophysis in Buddha's teaching. That the Buddha will not talk about certain things. Now, why? Why is it, for example, that he never describes the state of a person in nibbana or nirvana? Well, it took me a long time to figure this out, over 10 years, because this is one of the hidden secrets. I had to go back down into dualistic religion, bhakti, that is bhakti to Shiva, the feminine form of the Absolute, and Shiva, the masculine form of the Absolute in the world, in the dualistic universe. And I had to go through and become qualified in all that knowledge before the pathway opened up to understand, finally, the real meaning of Buddha's teaching. And I got that information from the study of Ramana Maharshi and his books and teachings, which you can see here. So one thing led to another. One realization opened up the pathway to the next, and on, until in the last year or two, I finally focused exclusively on the Upanishads. Now, if you saw the previous video and the video before that, you know that the ultimate teaching of the Upanishads has to take place in secret. It has to be done privately. It cannot be done publicly because there are certain restrictions on who can hear the teachings of the Upanishads. I mean, even the texts of the Upanishads. And there's other restrictions on the environmental conditions in which can be taught. So the Upanishads can only be taught effectively, meaning getting the realizations, in an environment that is secluded from dualistic life, from desire-based life, from householder life, basically. They have to be taught in an atmosphere of renunciation. This is given in the Upanishads themselves. Now, I'm not going to quote them because I shouldn't quote them in public. But take it from me, I've gone through all the major Upanishads with a fine-tooth comb, and this is the result. This is the answer. This is why you have all these people talking about Upanishads and teaching Upanishads on various channels on YouTube. And neither they nor none of their followers are enlightened. None of them have realization. Why? They don't follow the instructions in the Upanishads themselves. What are those instructions? Well, I just went over part of it. They have to be taught in private, in seclusion, where there's no energy of desire or acquisitiveness or possessiveness, where the only mood is the mood of service and renunciation. So this, of course, immediately disqualifies most of the people. They become theorists, philosophers, talking about words only. They don't have the experience that corresponds to the words because they're not practicing the Upanishads correctly. This is what I found out. As soon as I declared in that recent video that I am not going to teach the Upanishads publicly anymore, and withdrew, made private all of my videos on the Upanishads, a new pathway opened up. A new level of realization opened up. It's like a password. You go to some website and you want to read certain things, and they're protected with a password. You can't get in unless you have it. In the same way, there are certain very high levels of realization that you cannot enter into unless you meet the conditions. Now, God is everywhere and in everything and knows all. So if you're qualified to enter these regions of high realizations, you can. But if you're not qualified, and He'll know, then you'll miss it. You'll get misdirected. You'll get off the path. You'll fall down. You'll have problems. I was having problems. I was having a lot of disturbance from outsiders until I decided no more public teaching of Upanishads. It all stopped. Just boom, within a matter of a few days. So I was getting a reaction. And anybody who tries to teach this information publicly is going to get a reaction. And then there were certain questions. For example, well, why do we wear this tripundra? All the scriptures, many scriptures, recommend tripundra as a practice. It's called Shirovrata. But none of them explain why. Oh yeah, they give some surface explanation, but not the deep explanation. The deep explanation's in the Upanishads, and they're secret. Another really good one is, it's stated in the Rig Veda and in other places that Brahman wanted to create the universe. He said, I am one. Let me become many. So he created the universe and all the living entities and then entered in all of them as the super soul, Paramatma, Antaryami, the dweller in the heart, and so on. Why? Only the Upanishads address this question. It's very deep, very esoteric. I had read it 2 or 3 times and gone right by it until I stopped public teaching. Then, boom, it jumped out at me and I got the answer. It's right there in the Upanishads. You don't hear anybody talking about it because they can't get it unless they stop the public teaching. That is part of the qualification, that is part of the password, if you will, that lets you open up that particular knowledge. And there's lots more. There's so much more. Really, I wish I could talk about it. I'd love to give you this knowledge. I want to, but I can't, because otherwise I would become a hypocrite like all these other people and then just become a theorist, a philosopher, a dealer in words, selling water by the riverside, it's called. If you're at the riverside, there's plenty of water. So if somebody comes up to you and tries to sell your water, you're like, what? Come on, I don't need that. Look at this river is here. Similarly, Brahman is everywhere. Brahman is everything. Brahman is you, the self, Atman. But you can't know this, you can't realize this unless you actually practice the Upanishads. And part of that practice is the confidentiality. It's just like if you want to work for, let's say, OpenAI or Microsoft or any of the big tech companies, you have to sign a confidentiality agreement. They won't let you in the door unless you do. So what to speak of like the supreme knowledge, that knowledge, knowing which everything becomes known. In other words, the basis of all knowledge, the root from which all other knowledge is derived. That's in the Upanishads. But you can't get it, you can't even recognize it unless you follow the qualified procedure, and that includes confidentiality. I'd love to tell you, but I can't. There is one way, though. We've started this new program called the Self-Realization Intensive. Consciousness Research Center, Self-Realization Intensive. CRC, SRI, LSMFT. But with all kidding aside, this is the authorized approach of how to study the Upanishads successfully. By successfully, I mean you actually get the result. You actually get the realizations that are talked about in the Upanishads because you're following the procedure, you're following the practice, including the renunciation and the confidentiality that are like passwords into the higher realms of realization. So, we have given all this information in the documents linked in the video description. First of all, the CRC video catalog that describes all the preliminary information leading up to this, and then the description or functional description of the CRC itself, and finally, the information on the CRC SRI, Self-Realization Intensive. Those are linked in the documents below. So, if you are interested in the knowledge of the Upanishads, if you really want to realize the nature of the Upanishadic wisdom, you have to follow the procedure given in the Upanishads themselves. It's very simple, very straightforward. But because people today want a shortcut, they want to cheat, They want a cheat code for spiritual realization. There ain't no such thing. Forget about it. The only way to get that knowledge is to follow the original path. Now, back in Satya Yuga, everybody knew this stuff. And then in Treta Yuga, there were the Brahmanas. They knew, and they were throughout society, at least Vedic society. In Dvapara Yuga, only a few rishis knew. And in Kali Yuga, you can probably count the number of realized beings on the whole planet on the fingers of one hand. Because most people who approach the Upanishads break the rules. So they don't get the realizations. So then how can they share them with you? They can't. We're the only ones that we know of anyway who's actually following the process. Om Tat Sat. Om Shakti Om. Om Namah Shivaya.